That's the fat saw we have to put up with." The words, sharp and cold as shards of glass, hung in the opulent air of the grand metropolis ballroom. They came from my own daughter, Kendra. She stood there, a vision in white silk, her finger pointed directly at me, a look of pure contempt twisting her beautiful features. The room, filled with 200 of Charlotte's most affluent guests, erupted in a wave of cruel, tittering laughter. I could feel their stares, hot and judgmental, stripping me bare. I was Maureen, the ghost, the embarrassment, the mother in the cheap, wine-colored dress from a discount rack. My cheeks burned with a shame so profound I thought I might dissolve into the polished marble floor. My hands, rough and smelling faintly of the industrial cleaning solutions I used nightly, trembled as they clutched the small, carefully wrapped gift I'd brought. But then, a shift. A sudden chilling silence emanating from one man, Mr. Kensington, the groom's father, a man whose very posture screamed old money and authority, had been chuckling with the rest. But now, his laughter died in his throat. His eyes, previously full of amusement, were now wide with a dawning, horrifying recognition. They were locked on my face, and the color drained from his perfectly tanned skin. "Wait," he murmured, the single word cutting through the lingering sneers. He took a slow, hesitant step toward me, his designer shoes clicking softly on the marble. "Aren't you my new boss?" The laughter around us stuttered and died, replaced by a confused murmur that spread through the ballroom like a virus. Kendra's triumphant smirk faltered, her eyes darting between her father-in-law and me, trying to decipher this sudden, bizarre turn. "My name is Maureen Ellison. I am 66 years old, and for the last 30 years I have lived as a phantom in my own life. After my husband David was taken from us in a senseless car accident, when Kendra was just 12, a part of me was buried with him. The vibrant, hopeful woman I once was retreated, and in her place emerged a survivor, an invisible force who worked while the world slept. I became the woman who cleaned the glass and steel corporate towers in the dead of night, my existence marked by the squeak of my worn-out shoes on polished granite and the acrid scent of bleach that clung to my skin no matter how much I scrubbed. Kendra grew up shrouded in a cloak of shame woven from my humility. She was ashamed of my calloused hands, my thrift store wardrobe, the way I had to calculate the cost of a loaf of bread before buying it. She never saw the strength it took to get up every day after losing David. She only saw the poverty that clung to us. What she never knew, what no one could have ever guessed, was that in the silence of those empty offices, I wasn't just cleaning, I was learning. While vacuuming carpets and emptying trash bins, I absorbed the conversations of late-working executives. I listened to their merger plans, their stock tips, their panic during market crashes, and their boasts during triumphs. The corporate world became my university, and the discarded financial reports I rescued from recycling bins became my textbooks. In my modest two-bedroom apartment surrounded by stacks of used finance books, a fierce determination was born. Starting with a mere $50 invested in a stock I'd overheard in a hushed, excited conversation, I began to build. While my body ached from mopping floors, my mind was calculating compound interest and analyzing market trends. For 20 years, I wore the same 3 sweaters, ate beans on toast, and took 3 different buses to get to my cleaning shifts. But secretly, quietly, I was amassing a fortune. My initial $50 grew, multiplied, and transformed. I bought undervalued properties through shell corporations. I acquired silent stakes in floundering companies that I knew, from the whispers I'd heard, were on the cusp of a breakthrough. I became M.K. Ellington, a reclusive, enigmatic investor known for a Midas touch, all while my daughter saw me as a failure. A pathetic figure to be tolerated and hidden away. And now, Mr. Kensington, the man whose company I had just acquired for $45 million 2 weeks prior, was staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. He was the man who had signed over his life's work to the entity known as M.K. Ellington, never imagining that the mysterious, sharp-minded benefactor was the same woman his new daughter-in-law had just publicly branded a fat. I watched the puzzle pieces click into place behind his eyes, the brief video calls where he'd seen a grainy image of me, the confident voice on the phone during negotiations, the signature on the contracts. The realization was a physical blow to him. The silence, once confined to our immediate circle, now swallowed the entire ballroom. The guests sensed the seismic shift in the atmosphere. The sneers melted into confusion, then into a wary curiosity. Kendra, sensing her moment of triumph slipping away, rushed to Mr. Kensington's side. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness she reserved for moments when she needed to manipulate. "This is my mother, Maureen. You know, the one who cleans buildings." She let out a nervous laugh, but it was hollow, desperate. Mr. Kensington didn't even look at her. His eyes were still fixed on me, filled with a new, terrifying respect. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice trembling, Is that you?" His hand shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, no doubt searching for the digital paperwork, the corporate profile, anything to confirm the impossible truth. The laughter had died, replaced by a chilling silence. The man who had laughed at me now looked at me with fear. But the real betrayal was just beginning to unfold. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. For 2 decades, I had guarded this secret, building a fortress of wealth to protect myself from ever feeling vulnerable again. I had 3 phones, a simple flip phone Kendra knew about, a smartphone for my M.K. Ellington business, and a secure, encrypted device for my most sensitive transactions. My life was a perfectly constructed lie, a double existence designed to keep the world and my own daughter at arm's length. Kendra's new husband, Kyle, approached. He was a kind-faced young man, inheriting his father's gentle eyes but not his business acumen. "Dad, you're scaring everyone," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "What does Mrs. Ellison have to do with your company?" Mr. Kensington finally tore his gaze from me to look at his son, and then at Kendra, his expression a mixture of pity and dawning horror. "Kendra," he said, his voice low and serious, "this woman, your mother, is M.K. Ellington. She is the person who just saved our company from collapse. She saved hundreds of jobs, including my own." The word Ellington echoed in the vast space. Kendra's face went blank, as if the information was too immense for her brain to process. "Ellington?" she repeated slowly, like a child sounding out a foreign word. "My mother is Ellison. Baines, you know that." Her voice rose, becoming shrill. "This is my mother. She's a cleaner." But the conviction in her voice was cracking, splintering under the weight of Mr. Kensington's unwavering certainty. I still hadn't spoken a word. For 30 years, I had mastered the art of silence, of letting my actions speak in a language no one could hear. But now, my silence was a weapon. Every second that ticked by without me confirming or denying was another turn of the knife in the perfect fantasy life Kendra had built for herself. I could see the frantic calculations behind her eyes. She was re-evaluating every sneer, every condescending remark, every time she'd lied to her friends about what I did for a living. The foundation of her entire identity, being the sophisticated daughter who had risen above her humble beginnings, was crumbling to dust right in front of her designer shoes. "Mom?" The word was a tentative broken sound from her lips. It was the first time she had called me that in years, without it being laced with derision. Is what he's saying true? Her eyes were wide, shining with a terrifying mixture of confusion, a flicker of hope, and something much, much darker. Raw, unadulterated greed. I could see it click into place. The cheap clothes, the bus rides, the small apartment. It hadn't been poverty. It had been a a choice that made every cruel thing she'd ever said to me 1,000 times more monstrous. Mr. Kensington, seeking to regain control of the situation he had inadvertently created, extended a hand toward me, a gesture of deference that was not lost on anyone. "Allow me to properly introduce you all," he announced, his voice gaining strength. "This is Maureen Ellison, the businesswoman who just saved my company and the livelihoods of over 600 families." All eyes were on me. The phantom was stepping into the light. The laughter was gone, replaced by a hushed, reverent awe. This was the moment. After decades of silence, the time had come for me to speak, but the words that left my lips were not of confirmation or triumph. "Mr. Kensington," I said, my voice soft but clear, cutting through the tension like a laser. "I appreciate your words, but I believe there's a misunderstanding." A wave of relief washed over Kendra's face. She thought I was going to deny it, to restore her world to its rightful order. "I didn't buy your company to be recognized or thanked," I continued, my gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling squarely on my daughter. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. It's a lesson I learned from observing a great deal of unnecessary suffering in this world." I paused, letting the ambiguity hang in the air. I hadn't confirmed I was M.K. Ellington, but I hadn't denied it either. I had simply stated a truth that was larger than all of us. I had placed the burden of interpretation squarely on Kendra's shoulders. I saw the hope in her eyes turn to confusion, then to a dawning, frantic suspicion. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and I held the key. The game, after a lifetime of silence, had finally begun. The rest of the reception passed in a blur for everyone else, but for Kendra and me, it was a silent, brutal standoff. She watched my every move, her eyes begging for a sign, a confirmation, a denial, anything to end the torment of not knowing. I simply moved through the crowd, a serene smile on my face, accepting the hesitant, newly respectful nods from the same people who had laughed at me an hour before. Later, as I stood alone waiting for my taxi, the cool night air a balm on my burning skin, I felt not victory, but a profound emptiness. The secret was out, or at least the shadow of it was. The carefully constructed wall between Maureen the mother and M.K. Ellington, the mogul, had been breached. The first call came as I was unlocking the door to my humble apartment. I let it go to voicemail. The second came as I was boiling water for tea. By the third, I knew the siege had begun. I picked up the phone. "Mom?" Kendra's voice was strained, a pathetic attempt at warmth. "I just wanted to check on you. You seemed upset at the wedding." "I'm fine, Kendra. It was a beautiful wedding. Kyle seems like a wonderful man." "Don't change the subject." The facade cracked instantly. "What was Mr. Kensington talking about? Why did he call you Ellington? Do you know who that is?" "Kendra," I said, my voice weary. "It's been a long day. We can talk about this another time." "Mom, please, I need to know. Devin's family is acting so strange. They keep asking questions about you, about our family. I need to know what's going on." I closed my eyes, leaning against my kitchen counter. The familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner filled the air. This was my sanctuary, my disguise. And now it was the center of a storm. "Kendra," I said softly, "what does it matter? You've made your feelings about me perfectly clear for years. Why does it suddenly matter who I am or what I do?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, ragged and emotional. When she spoke again, her voice was small, a frightened child's. "Because if it's true, it means I'm the monster you must think I am." The line went dead. I stood there in the silence of my small kitchen, the truth of her words echoing in the emptiness. The betrayal was no longer just hers. My decades of deception, my choice to live a hidden life, had now become a weapon that was cutting us both in ways I had never anticipated. The invisible woman was invisible no more, and the light was revealing wounds that had festered for far too long. If you felt the sting of Maureen's betrayal and the weight of her secret, leave a comment with the word karma below. Let me know which part of the story hit you the hardest. This is just the beginning of Maureen and Kendra's story. The fallout from the wedding will unravel decades of lies and force a painful reckoning. To make sure you don't miss Section 2, where Kendra's investigation begins and the web of deceit tightens, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support through likes, comments, and subscriptions is what allows me to bring you these deep, emotional life stories. Thank you for listening. Mom, just tell me the truth. Did you know Mr. Kensington before? What did he mean? Kendra's voice was a shrill, desperate thing on the other end of the line. It was the 7th call in 3 days. I cradled the phone between my shoulder and ear, my hands busy scrubbing the stubborn grout in my tiny bathroom. The familiar, mindless work was a comfort. Kendra, I've told you, it was a misunderstanding. The man was clearly confused. I kept my voice even, a flat calm against the hurricane of her anxiety. Confused? He looked you right in the eye. He said your name. Ellington, she shrieked. Devon's father doesn't get confused about the person who owns his company. I rinsed the brush, watching the dirty water swirl down the drain. Perhaps he saw a resemblance. Men his age, under stress. They see ghosts where there are none. It wasn't a lie. Not really. It was a carefully placed seed of doubt, one I knew her paranoid, greedy mind would water and nurture into a tangled forest of speculation. I maintained my routine with monastic discipline. The 5 a.m. alarm, the bitter black coffee, the worn-out cleaning uniform. I took the 3 separate buses across the city, just as I always had. But during those long, lurching rides, while the world saw a tired, older woman staring out the window, I was on my corporate phone, quietly directing a portfolio worth over $200 million. The dichotomy was my armor, and it had never felt more necessary. The first unannounced visit came on a Tuesday evening. I heard the fumbling at the main building's lock, the frustrated curse, and then the sharp, impatient rap on my apartment door. When I opened it, Kendra stood there, a vision of displaced luxury in an ivory cashmere coat that probably cost more than my entire living room set. Her designer heels looked profoundly out of place on the worn linoleum of my hallway. She swept in without an invitation, her eyes performing a rapid, dismissive inventory of my home. The thrift store sofa, the faded curtains, the chipped mug on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she announced, perching on the edge of the sofa as if afraid it might soil her. "I can't live like this, Mom. The uncertainty is killing me. Devon thinks I'm obsessed." I sat in my favorite armchair, the one I'd rescued from the curb and reupholstered myself. "Like what, Kendra? I'm living the same life I always have." "Don't play dumb," she snapped, her composure shattering. "Mr. Kensington hasn't stopped asking about you. He talks about M.K. Ellington with this reverence, and every time he says the name, he looks at me like I'm some kind of idiot for not knowing my own mother." Her voice cracked. "So, which is it? Are you a pathetic cleaner, or are you a secret millionaire who let her own daughter live in shame?" The question hung in the air, brutal and direct. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of her own words press down on her. Finally, I stood and walked toward her, holding out my hands. I showed her my palms, the skin rough and etched with the history of 1,000 scrubbed floors, my nails short and practical. "Look at these hands, Kendra," I said softly. "Do these look like the hands of a CEO? Do they look like the hands of a woman who controls companies?" For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by that stubborn, dangerous spark. "Then explain it," she demanded, jumping up. "Explain why he recognized you. Explain why he looked at you like you were the most important person in the room." I turned away, feigning a sudden interest in the books on my shelf, my collection of used finance and economic textbooks. "Perhaps," I said, my back to her, I remind him of someone from his past, someone he crossed in business, or someone who helped him. I turn slowly, meeting her gaze. The corporate world is full of shadows, Kendra. Not everything is as it seems. I was giving her just enough, a narrative of mystery and hidden connections, to feed her obsession without confirming a thing. I watched her mind race, connecting dots that weren't there, building a fantasy that was far more tantalizing and far more torturous than the simple truth. The walls of my small apartment were closing in on her, and every cheap trinket, every worn-out piece of furniture felt like a deliberate lie. She was drowning in the sea of my ordinary life, desperate to find the hidden island of wealth she was now certain existed. Her visits became a siege. She came at strange hours, her eyes constantly scanning, searching for a crack in my facade. One afternoon, I came out of the kitchen to find her at my small desk, hastily shuffling through a stack of paid bills and grocery receipts. "I was just looking for a pen," she lied, her cheeks flushing. "The pen is right there, Kendra," I said, pointing to the mug full of cheap ballpoints on the desk. "In the future, please ask." What she didn't know was that my real documents, the deeds, the stock certificates, the bank statements, were locked in a secure vault in a private bank downtown. My apartment was a stage set, meticulously dressed to portray honest poverty. But a good director knows you must plant props to lead your audience. I had left a few carefully placed clues. A bank deposit slip for $300 that looked like it had been clumsily altered. A phone number scribbled on a notepad that, if called, led to a pizza place, but to a paranoid mind, could seem like a corporate line. The escalation came on Friday when she brought Kyle. It was his first time in my apartment, and his discomfort was palpable. He was a good man, raised with manners, and he tried to hide his unease as he navigated the small space. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, his voice respectful, "Kendra has told me about the confusion at the wedding. My father hasn't been himself since. He's quite insistent that he knows you from a professional context." Kendra sat rigidly on the sofa, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "We thought maybe you could clear things up," she said, her voice tight, "for everyone's peace of mind." "And how would you like me to do that?" I asked, my tone neutral. Kyle cleared his throat. "Well, the company was purchased by a woman named M.K. Ellington. We wondered if, perhaps you know her? Or if there's some family connection we're not aware of." Kendra leaned forward, her body tense with anticipation. This was the question she'd been leading to. I gave them a gentle, pitying smile. "Ellison is a common name, but if your father is so eager to meet the person who bought his company, his lawyers can certainly arrange an introduction. I don't understand why he'd want to personally thank someone for a simple business transaction." Kendra couldn't contain herself. "Because she saved hundreds of jobs," she burst out. "Because she paid more than the company was worth. It was an act of generosity, not just business." The words hung in the air, a confession that she had been digging, investigating, and pressuring Kyle for details. She knew the specifics of the deal. She had assembled the financial puzzle. Now she just needed me to hand her the final piece, but I had no intention of making it that easy. I simply sat there, sipping my tea, the picture of serene confusion, and for the first time I saw not just desperation in her eyes, but a flicker of genuine fear. The fear of being wrong, and the more terrifying fear of being right. The breaking point arrived on a rain-swept Wednesday. I was returning from a long shift, my body aching, my spirit weary, and I found her sitting on the wet concrete steps of my building. She'd been waiting for 3 hours. Her cashmere coat was soaked through, her hair plastered to her head, her makeup streaked by tears and rain. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice raw. "I need the truth." I brought her upstairs, sat her on my sofa, and wrapped a worn blanket around her shoulders. As I made her tea, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who'd come to me with scraped knees and broken dreams. For a fleeting moment, my resolve wavered. I hired someone, she confessed, her hands shaking so badly the teacup rattled in its saucer. A private investigator to find M.K. Ellington. My blood ran cold, but my face remained a mask of mild curiosity. And what did he find? Nothing, she sobbed, the word a confession of utter defeat. She's a ghost. Companies in 12 countries, but no photos, no public records, no trail. The investigator said in 30 years he's never seen anyone so careful. I sat opposite her, saying nothing. My decades of meticulous work had held. The fortress walls had repelled the assault. Mom, she looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hopeless. You were there, in those offices at night. You heard things, saw things. Did you ever learn something you could have used? It was a direct hit, frighteningly close to the truth. Kendra, I said, my voice soft with a feigned sadness. If I had learned corporate secrets while cleaning, don't you think our lives would have been different? Don't you think I would have given you a better childhood? She shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. Not if you didn't want anyone to know. Not if it was safer to look poor. Then came the real confession, the one that changed the entire game. We're in trouble, Mom, she whispered, the facade of the wealthy socialite crumbling to dust. Deep trouble. Mr. Kensington's company was worse off than anyone knew. The sale cleared the business debts, but their personal debts, our debts, they're crushing us. I remained silent, letting her unravel. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, the cars, my jewelry, the wedding, all on credit. We thought the money would never stop. She covered her face. We owe over $600,000. We're going to lose everything. There it was. The desperation wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about financial survival. The golden life was a gilded cage, and the door was slamming shut. And what do you expect me to do? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She looked at me, all pride gone, replaced by the naked plea of a drowning woman. If you have anything, any money at all, even if it's just a little saved, could you help us? It would be a loan. We'd pay you back with interest. You're the only person I can ask. The room was silent except for the sound of the rain against the window and her ragged breathing. This was the crossroads. This was the moment her years of contempt met the cold, hard reality of consequence. She had finally revealed her hand. It wasn't a daughter seeking her mother. It was a debtor confronting a possible lender. The humiliation at the wedding was now a debt she needed me to forgive, in more ways than one. I looked at my daughter, this stranger I had raised, who had valued appearances over authenticity, wealth over warmth. The path to any kind of redemption for either of us was going to be long and painful, and it had to start with her understanding the true cost of everything she had thrown away. Kendra, I said slowly, my heart a stone in my chest, let me ask you something. If I really were a millionaire, if I really were this Ellington person, what would you do? How would that change anything between us? Her eyes widened, the hope in them so bright it was terrifying. It would mean we could save our home, our marriage, our future. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. And what would it mean? About the last 20 years? What would it mean about you? The question hit its mark. She flinched as if I'd struck her. The silence that followed was my answer. The siege was over. The real war for my daughter's soul was about to begin. The tension is building. Will Maureen reveal her true self to save her daughter from financial ruin? Or will she let Kendra face the consequences of her choices? What would you do in her position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. To be the first to witness the shocking confrontation next, where Maureen lays her cards on the table and presents Kendra with an impossible choice, make sure you've subscribed and have notifications turned on. The story is about to take its most dramatic turn yet. So what's it going to be, Kendra? Are you here for me, or for the possibility of me? The words hung in the air of my small apartment, stark and unforgiving. Kendra stared at me from across the coffee table, her tear-streaked face a mask of confusion and desperation. The rain from her hours-long vigil had dried, but a deeper storm was brewing inside her. For 3 days after her confession of $600,000 in debt, my phone had been a constant source of her frantic energy. The messages evolved from pathetic pleas, "Mom, I'm so sorry, I never meant to hurt you," to demanding inquiries. "Did you think about what I said? Can you help us?" And finally, to a tense, obsessive silence that was somehow worse. I knew her. That silence meant she was plotting, scheming, trying to find another angle. On Saturday evening, I decided it was time to force the issue. I called her. "Come to my apartment tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, bring Kyle." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "And Kendra, make sure no one else knows about this, especially not the Kensingtons." When they arrived, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Kendra was dressed as if for a high-stakes business meeting, her black designer dress a stark contrast to my worn-out sofa. Kyle looked pale and uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time, which, in a way, he was. He was now looking for clues, for the hidden wealth his wife was so certain existed. I served tea in my chipped mugs, the domestic normalcy of the gesture, a bizarre counterpoint to the tension. "Before we begin," I said, my voice low and serious, "you need to understand something. The conversation we're about to have cannot leave this room. There are powerful people involved, and your financial future depends entirely on your ability to keep a secret." Kyle cleared his throat, his manners fighting with his unease. "Mrs. Ellison, Jasmine told me you might know people who could help us. We appreciate any assistance, but we don't want to get you into any trouble." He was a good man, a decent one. His concern was for my well-being, a stark contrast to the barely concealed avarice I saw flickering in Kendra's eyes. "Kyle," I said softly, "how much has Kendra told you about my past work?" He shifted nervously. "She said you worked for an important company years ago and that you might know some influential people who could help us secure a loan." It was a heavily sanitized version, and I could see he was only grasping the very edges of the truth Kendra had been weaving. "It's more complicated than that," I said, standing up to close the curtains. The theatrical gesture made them both tense. For years, I didn't just clean the offices of powerful corporations. I was paid to observe, to listen, to report. Kendra leaned forward, her breath catching. "Report what? To whom?" Her voice was a hushed, eager whisper. "Financial irregularities, private conversations, meetings that were never meant to be documented." I let the words hang in the air, watching her construct the narrative in her mind. My real employer wasn't the cleaning service. It was M.K. Ellington herself. The silence was absolute. Kyle blinked, confused, but Kendra turned as white as the wedding dress she'd worn just weeks ago. You worked directly for her?" The name caught in her throat. "For over 15 years, I confirmed, layering the lie with just enough truth to make it solid. My official job was the night cleaning. My real job was to be her eyes and ears in an industry riddled with corruption and fraud. Kyle finally found his voice. "Mrs. Ellison, are you saying you were a corporate spy?" His innocence was almost endearing. "It was more than that," I said, deciding to give Kendra the final tantalizing piece she craved. "During all those years, M.K. Ellington compensated me very generously for my discretion, and when I retired from that role, she made sure I had more than enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of my life." Kendra practically levitated from the sofa. "How much?" The question was a blunt, hungry thing. "How much money do you have?" "Enough," I replied, my voice calm, a rock against the tide of her greed. Enough to solve your financial crisis several times over. But the question isn't how much I have. The question is, what you are willing to do to access it. Kyle looked horrified. Mrs. Ellison, we don't want your money as a gift. We'll work, we'll pay interest, we'll sign anything. But Kendra was already beyond such niceties. What do you want us to do? She asked, her eyes locked on mine. What's the price? The moment of truth had arrived. The mask was off. It was no longer about family or forgiveness. It was a transaction, and I was about to present them with the bill for a lifetime of disrespect. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared with meticulous care. Inside was a document that looked utterly official, complete with legal-looking stamps and a forged signature. The heading read, Conditional Financial Transfer Agreement. I placed it on the coffee table between us. This, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, is a proposal I have been able to negotiate through my contacts. Kendra snatched the paper, her eyes devouring the lines while Kyle read over her shoulder, his expression growing more alarmed with each passing second. First condition, Kendra read aloud, her voice trembling, complete transfer of all current personal assets, the house, cars, everything, into your name as collateral. She looked up, a flicker of fear in her eyes. You'd own everything we have? Temporarily, I said, watching them both carefully, until you demonstrate you can responsibly manage such a significant sum. It's a standard protection. Kyle shook his head, his face pale. Mrs. Ellison, that would make us completely dependent on you. We'd have no safety net. Kendra ignored him, already moving to the next clause. Second condition, she continued, her voice dropping to a disbelieving whisper. Immediate relocation to a city of your choice. Limited family contact for a 5-year probationary period. Kyle shot up from the sofa as if electrocuted. Limited contact? What does that even mean? The courtesy was gone from his voice, replaced by pure, unadulterated alarm. It means, I said calmly, that for 5 years, you would live where I choose, in a house I provide, on a monthly stipend I determine. Family visits would be restricted to pre-approved occasions. All communication with me would go through intermediaries. Kendra was frantically scanning the rest of the document. Third condition, her voice cracked, voluntary renunciation of all future inheritance rights. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. You're saying if we take this money, we give up any claim to anything you might leave behind when you die? I finished for her. Yes, this would be your one and only financial benefit from our family relationship. After this, you are on your own. Kyle was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. Mrs. Ellison, with all due respect, this isn't help. This is indentured servitude. You're offering us money in exchange for cutting ourselves off from you as a family. But Kendra was still glued to the document, the wheels in her head turning. How much would the stipend be? She asked, her voice pragmatic, already negotiating. And what kind of house? The difference in their reactions was a chasm, and it broke my heart to see it so clearly. Kyle saw the proposal for the cruel test it was. Kendra saw only the numbers. The stipend would be $4,000 a month, I replied. The house would be modest but comfortable. In a small city with a low cost of living, you could live comfortably but not lavishly. Kendra, Kyle turned to his wife, his voice full of disbelief. Are you actually considering this? Seriously? Talking about accepting money in exchange for exiling ourselves from your mother? Devin, we are going to lose everything, she exploded, jumping to her feet. The house, the cars, our credit, our standing. This is a way out. 5 years is not forever. And after 5 years, what? He demanded, his voice thick with pain. We come back as strangers. Your mother becomes someone we used to know. Our future children grow up without a grandmother. His questions were like daggers, exposing the true, horrific cost of the transaction. I remained by the window, a silent observer to the collapse of their united front. This was the conversation I needed to hear. "Kendra," Kyle pleaded, his voice softening. "We can fix this ourselves. We can sell everything, downsize, get real jobs. We can repair the relationship with your mother through actions, not through some financial bargain with our family ties." "You don't understand," Kendra cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "You didn't grow up with the shame of never having enough. You don't know what it's like to be this close to losing it all. My relationship with my mother is already broken. Maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe this is the price for how I've treated her." "Don't say that," Kyle exclaimed. "This isn't justice, Kendra. This is vengeance." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Mrs. Ellison, I know she has hurt you deeply, but this isn't the way." His words struck a chord deeper than I wanted to admit. He had seen right through my carefully constructed test to the raw, wounded desire for payback that fueled it. The ultimatum was on the table. Their marriage was cracking under the strain. Kyle saw a path to redemption through hard work and genuine apology. Kendra saw only a financial escape hatch, even if it meant selling the very concept of family. The chasm between them was now a canyon, and I was the one who had blown it open. I watched them, my heart a conflicted mess of triumph and sorrow. I had proven my point. Faced with salvation, Kendra's first instinct was to transact, while Kyle's was to heal. But the victory felt hollow and ashen. It was time. The charade had served its purpose. It was time for the truth, not as a weapon, but as a reckoning. "There is a fourth condition," I said, my voice cutting through their argument. They both fell silent and looked at me. "A condition that is not written in the document." I walked to my desk and pulled out a different, thicker folder. This one contained the real documents. "Before you sign anything, before you make any decision," I said, my voice trembling for the first time, "I need to tell you the whole truth about who I really am." Kendra let the fake contract slip from her fingers onto the table. "What truth?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a fresh, consuming terror. "What more could there be?" "The truth," I said, placing the real folder on the coffee table, "is that I don't need contacts to get that money." I opened the folder, revealing the first page, a bank statement from an exclusive private bank. "The truth is, that document you just read is completely fake." I let that sink in for a moment, watching the confusion warp their features. "And the truth is, Kendra," I said, looking directly into my daughter's eyes, "I am exactly who Mr. Kensington thought I was at your wedding." The silence was so profound I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. I placed the bank statement in front of them. The account name read Maureen K. Ellison. The current balance was a number with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. Kendra picked it up, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her lips moving soundlessly. The paper fluttered from her grasp as if it had burned her. This is real," she breathed. Kyle leaned over, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. "Mrs. Ellison, Miss Ellington, you really are." "I am M.K. Ellington," I confirmed, my voice strong and clear for the first time. "For 30 years, I have built a business empire valued at over $200 million. And all this time, you have been living less than 3 miles from one of the richest women in the country." I spread more documents on the table: corporate ownership certificates, acquisition contracts for companies they would recognize, including the one that had saved Kyle's family. Every page was another brick in the fortress of my real life, collapsing onto the fragile fantasy of theirs. Kendra collapsed onto the sofa, her body going limp. "But you live here," she whispered, her voice broken. "You wear second-hand clothes. You take the bus. Why? Why would you live like this if you have all of that?" She gestured weakly at the documents that represented a power she couldn't even comprehend. It was the question I had waited for my entire secretive life. Because, I said, sitting down opposite her, the weight of decades in my voice, after your father died, I decided I would never be vulnerable again. I built an empire so that no one, not even my own daughter, could ever make me feel small. I paused, letting the painful truth settle in the room. But I also decided to live simply so I would never lose sight of what truly matters in life. A lesson, it seems, I failed to teach you. Kyle was still staring at the documents, a dawning horror on his face. These companies? You're the angel investor who saved my cousin's business. You're the reason my aunt still has her job at the textile factory. He looked at me with a new, awestruck respect. You've been saving people all over this city for years. Not just this city, I said softly. In 12 different countries. I acquire failing companies, not just for profit, but for the people whose livelihoods depend on them. Kendra finally looked up from her stunned silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. 30 years, she murmured, the words choked. For 30 years, I've looked down on you. I've been ashamed of you. I've treated you like you were nothing. Her voice broke completely. And all this time, you were more than anyone I have ever known. More successful, perhaps, I corrected gently, the pain sharp in my chest, but apparently not very successful as a mother. Kyle sat down heavily, covering his face with his hands. Oh God, Miss Ellington, he moaned, when I think of the things Kendra said about you to my family, the excuses she made. We judged you. We all judged you so harshly. You didn't judge me, Kyle, I said firmly. You judged the character I chose to play. What you saw was exactly what I wanted you to see. I took a deep breath, pulling out one final document from the folder. But it also means that every insult, every moment of humiliation was a choice Kendra made, thinking I had no power to retaliate. Kendra doubled over, sobbing as if her soul were being torn in two. I'm sorry, she wept. I'm so incredibly sorry. There are no words. There's no way to undo what I've done. You're right, I said, my voice calm but firm. There's no way to undo it, but there are ways to move forward. I placed the final document on the table. It was my real will. This is my current will, Kendra. Would you like to know what it says? She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. Mom, no, I don't care. I deserve to be disinherited. I deserve for you to cut me out completely. It says, I continued, overriding her protests, that upon my death, 70% of my fortune goes to the charitable foundations I've been secretly funding for years, shelters for abused women, scholarships for working-class children. I paused, letting the silence amplify my next words. The remaining 30% was intended for you and your future children. Kyle, ever perceptive, noted the past tense. Was intended? No longer, I said, looking directly at Kendra. After the wedding, I drafted a new will. Now 100% goes to charity. I watched the words land, watching them devastate her, because I realized that leaving you money would only validate your belief that wealth is more important than love. Kendra stood up, swaying on her feet. It's okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's completely okay. You have every right. She took a shaky step toward me. But please don't cut me out of your life while you're still alive. I don't care about the money anymore. I just want a chance to be your daughter. A real daughter. A real daughter? I repeated, the ghost of her wedding day words echoing in the room. Like the real daughter who introduced me as a fat SA a few weeks ago? Kyle stepped toward her, putting a steadying arm around her shoulders. Miss Ellington, he said, his voice firm but filled with compassion. I understand your pain. Your anger is justified. There are no excuses for how Kendra has behaved, but she is your daughter, and you are her mother. There has to be a path forward. There has to be. I looked at them. My daughter, broken and finally humble, and her husband, who somehow saw a path to redemption through the wreckage. The game was over. The test was complete, and I was left with the devastating results. Forgiveness, I said slowly, is not something you earn in one conversation, Kendra. It's something you build through consistent action over a very long time. Then tell me what to do, she pleaded, her eyes begging. Tell me how to start. You start, I said, my own tears finally threatening to fall. By publicly admitting what you did. You start by apologizing to every single person who was at that wedding. And you start by treating me with respect, not because I'm M.K. Ellington, but because I am your mother, and I should have always deserved it. She nodded, a violent, desperate motion. I will. I'll do all of that, I promise. And I said, gathering the documents that represented my double life, need time. Time to decide if I truly believe you can change, or if this is just another performance to get what you want. The truth was out. The invisible woman was gone, replaced by a mother and a mogul standing at a crossroads, staring at the shattered pieces of her family, wondering if they could ever be put back together again. The revelation is complete, but the healing has only just begun. Can a relationship survive such a monumental betrayal and decades of deception? What would you need to see from Kendra to begin to forgive her? Share your thoughts in the comments. The final chapter of this emotional saga is coming next. To witness the stunning conclusion and find out if Maureen and Kendra can rebuild their relationship from the ashes, ensure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on all notifications. You won't want to miss the end of this powerful story. I don't want your money, Mom. I want to learn how to build my own. Those words, spoken by my daughter Kendra just 2 months after the night our world shattered, were more valuable to me than any stock dividend or corporate acquisition. They hung in the air of my new penthouse apartment, a space that finally reflected the truth of who I was. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Charlotte skyline, a view I had earned, not inherited. There were no more thrift store dresses, no more multi-bus commutes. For the first time in 30 years, Maureen Ellison and M.K. Ellington occupied the same body, the same space, and it was both terrifying and liberating. The transformation had been brutal and beautiful. The day after my revelation, Kendra had called, her voice hollow with resolve. I'm going to fix this, she'd said. I don't know how, but I am. A week later, she and Kyle organized a dinner. Not a small private affair, but a gathering at an upscale restaurant with Mr. Kensington, his entire family, and the 200 closest guests from their wedding in attendance. It was a deliberate, painful recreation of the scene of the crime. I remember sitting there, my back straight, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress, feeling the weight of every stare. Kendra stood up, a single piece of paper trembling in her hands. Her voice didn't shake out of fear, but out of a raw, unfiltered remorse. 6 weeks ago, she began, the room falling into a dead silence. I stood before you and publicly humiliated the most important woman in my life. I called my mother a fat sigh and laughed as if her pain were my entertainment. She paused, swallowing hard, her eyes finding mine across the room. What you didn't know, what I didn't know, is that my mother is one of the most successful, compassionate businesswomen in this country. But that is not what makes my behavior unforgivable. What makes it unforgivable is that she is my mother, and for my entire adult life, I have chosen cruelty over love, materialism over character. She didn't cry for pity. She cried from the sheer, agonizing weight of the truth. She detailed specific instances of her neglect, her sneering comments, her shame. She apologized not to M.K. Ellington, the millionaire, but to Maureen Ellison, her mother. Mr. Kensington had wept openly, later apologizing to me with a sincerity that healed a small, bruised part of my soul. The collective shame in that room was a tangible force, but it was cleansed by the scorching honesty of Kendra's words. The public apology was just the first step on a long, arduous road. The real test wasn't in words, but in actions. It was in the quiet, daily choice to be better. Kendra and Kyle did something I never truly believed they would. They sold their sprawling, mortgage-to-the-hilt house, their luxury cars, and all the trappings of a life they could no longer afford. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood not unlike the one I had left behind. Kendra, with her art history degree, took a job as a receptionist at a local medical clinic. Kyle, leaving the skeleton of his father's company, became a junior accountant at a small local firm. When I first visited their new home, the contrast was jarring. The space was small, but it was filled with a genuine warmth their mansion had always lacked. There were no designer labels in sight, only simple, functional furniture. The first time I offered to pay off their remaining debts, Kyle had been the one to speak, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Ellington, we appreciate it more than you know, but we need to do this ourselves. We need to prove to you and to ourselves that we can stand on our own feet." It was during our weekly lunches, which began as stiff, formal affairs and slowly thawed into something resembling a real relationship, that the most profound changes occurred. Kendra started asking questions, not about my money, but about my mind. "Mom," she asked one day over sandwiches, "how did you know which stocks to buy first? Weren't you terrified of losing what little you had?" Another time, her voice filled with a childlike curiosity I hadn't heard since she was small, she asked, "How do you separate business from emotion? How did you stay disciplined for years without seeing immediate results?" These questions broke my heart in a new way. They revealed a staggering gap in her upbringing. I had been so busy building my secret fortress, so determined to shield her from the struggle, that I had failed to teach her the most fundamental lessons of resilience, patience, and self-worth. Her obsession with appearances and wealth was, in part, a symptom of my own secrecy, a reaction to a world where money was a mysterious, magical force that appeared and disappeared without explanation, rather than a product of grit and intelligence. The turning point, the moment I felt the first genuine flicker of hope for our future, came 4 months after the revelation. Kendra arrived at our lunch beaming, a light in her eyes that had nothing to do with material possession. "Mom," she said, unable to contain her smile, "this month we paid all our bills, on time, without using a single credit card." She looked at me, her face glowing with a pride that was entirely her own. "It's the first time in my adult life that's happened." It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but for Kendra, it was a mountain she had climbed with her own 2 hands. And then she placed her hand on Kyle's, and they shared a look of pure, unadulterated joy. "And," Kyle said, his voice bursting with happiness, "we have something else to tell you." Kendra looked directly at me, her eyes shining with tears. "We're going to have a baby." The world stopped. The noise of the restaurant faded into a distant hum. A baby, a grandchild. After decades of resigning myself to a lonely old age, the universe was offering me a second chance. A chance to be a grandmother, to be part of a family, not as a secret or a shameful figure, but as myself. "We want to raise her differently," Kendra said, her voice fierce with a new determination. "We want her to know her grandmother from the very beginning. We want her to understand the value of hard work and humility, and we want her to know that family love is unconditional." In that moment, surrounded by the simple sounds of life, looking at my daughter's face, finally free of greed and full of a love that asked for nothing, I made the decision I'd been wrestling with for months. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, opening my purse and pulling out a document I had been carrying with me for weeks. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about what I want my legacy to be." Kendra immediately tensed. "Mom, we told you. We don't want your money. We mean that." "This isn't about giving you money," I said softly, placing the document on the table between us. "It's about giving you something more important. It's the charter for the Ellison Kensington Family Foundation." Kyle leaned forward, his accountant's mind already engaged. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," I explained, my heart swelling with a purpose I hadn't felt in years, "that I am converting half of my fortune into a charitable foundation that will be managed by our family for generations to come." I looked from his curious face to Kendra's astonished one. "It means that when my grandchild is old enough, they will learn about financial responsibility by managing resources to help others. It means that Kendra, if she wishes, can develop a career in philanthropy, using her talents to identify needs and create solutions. It means that none of you will ever be idle rich by inheritance, but you will always have the opportunity to build a meaningful life and make a difference in the world." Kendra began to cry, but these were not the tears of a desperate woman. They were tears of profound understanding and gratitude. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "It's exactly what our child needs. Purpose without privilege, opportunity without entitlement." The foundation became our bridge. It was a project that demanded the best of all of us: my experience, Kyle's meticulous nature, and Kendra's newfound empathy and eye for detail. For the first time in decades, we were not just related by blood. We were partners, united by a common goal that was bigger than any of us. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. We designed programs for shelters, funded literacy initiatives, and provided seed money for small businesses in struggling communities. Kendra flourished, her natural charm and intelligence finally channeled into something positive. She had a gift for seeing the human story behind the numbers, for connecting with people in a way my boardroom-honed instincts never could. And then, the day arrived. The day my granddaughter, Aaliyah Maureen Kensington, came into the world. When the nurse placed that tiny, warm, swaddled bundle in my arms, I felt a seismic shift in my soul. I looked down at her perfect, sleeping face, at the dark lashes resting on her cheeks, and I made a silent, sacred promise. I would never hide from her. She would know all of me, the woman who scrubbed floors and the woman who built empires. She would understand that strength comes in many forms, and that true wealth is measured not in a bank account, but in the love and integrity you build your life upon. There would be no secrets, no shame, no false identities, just the honest, complicated, beautiful truth. Now, when I look back on that terrible night at the wedding, the memory has lost its sting. The humiliation has been washed clean by a river of tears, honesty, and hard-won forgiveness. That moment, as painful as it was the catalyst we needed. Kendra had to lose everything she thought mattered to discover what truly did. I had to risk losing my daughter forever to learn how to truly be her mother. The question I am left with now, as I look toward a future filled with hope instead of solitude, is this. In your own life, have you had the courage to be completely honest about who you are? Or are you still hiding parts of yourself, your struggles, your successes, your dreams, your failures, behind a wall of fear or pride? Because the painful, beautiful truth I learned is this: there can be no real love where there are fundamental secrets. Money can build houses, but only truth and forgiveness can build a home. And in the end, that love, hard-won and fiercely protected, is the only legacy that truly, forever, endures. This concludes Maureen and Kendra's journey. Their story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late for truth, forgiveness, and a second chance. If this story moved you, please let me know in the comments. Your thoughts mean the world to me. If you want to be notified when I release my next powerful life story, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. There are so many more stories to tell, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thank you for your incredible support.